Why, hello there. As a late Christmas gift on December 30th, Edge Magazine released a 16-page interview with Hidetaka Miyazaki, From Software president and director of Elden Ring, for those who may not know. This interview is filled with some juicy new information and some fun tidbits about the development process, and I am going to fold this new information into what we've learned over the past 2 years and combine it into this video. Let's get into it. As we'd previously learned, the mythology of Elden Ring was written by George R. R. Martin, and Miyazaki expanded on this in the interview just a bit. They started with a series of meetings, primarily in the US, where they got to know one another and they connected over a passion and curiosity for fantasy worlds. They established the scope of work and decided that George R. R. Martin would craft the mythos in order to give him creative freedom and not the narrative of the game, which Miyazaki felt would be too limiting for him. Miyazaki said, "We started by giving him these very vague and broad themes and ideas for the mythos that I had swimming around in my head, along with what kind of games we typically make and the sort of themes we like to explore in our games. So it was all very loose and vague. Then he would come back to us with a lot of ideas. How about this, this, and this?" That back and forth started the exchange of ideas. From Software typically makes games with mechanics in mind first, and then they craft a story that fits with the experience of playing the game. So this was a bit different for them in that while they provided themes and concepts they wanted to tackle, likely both narratively and mechanically, George R. R. Martin's mythos would be the impetus that drove the game forward. Martin provided From a text document that depicted the setting or set the scene for the game and for the world, detailing the flow of history and the figures who appeared throughout it. A lot of the motifs that came from this and drove my creative thinking behind the elements in the game were connections between people, including parent and child relationships. I'm excited to see how this plays out in the game. From and Martin are known for making some problematic parents, to put it lightly. With Sekiro, From centered the story more around characters, and from everything we've seen, Elden Ring will also spend more time developing its cast of characters. From has always had a knack for making compelling characters, and these relationships being at the core, especially the parent and child relationships, has me very excited. Continuing the discussion about characters, Miyazaki elaborated on Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, featured on the cover of Edge magazine and seen in various marketing materials, and hung up as a portrait in the game in Stormveil Castle. Miyazaki told Edge that dramatic and heroic characters weren't really present in our previous titles, so this is something that was really appealing to me. How George R. R. Martin would depict the mystique and heroic qualities of those characters. And Godfrey is sort of the embodiment of that. He's one of the major players in the game. The disrespect to Artorias in this quote. But seriously, I think I understand where Miyazaki is coming from. While there are a few heroes in the dark worlds of From's games, there's really no role models, no one who has really come before to represent the ideals of what our character could be. Whereas Miyazaki says of Godfrey that he represents everything great about the Elden Ring and about the lands between at that time. Godfrey was the first Elden Lord, and we learn in this interview that he was married to Eternal Queen Marika. I have speculated that Godwyn and Godrick are his sons, and this only reinforces that. Miyazaki mentions that there were 2 Elden Lords, and I've speculated that Godwyn is the golden child that took up the mantle of Elden Lord after Godfrey. And what happened to Godfrey? Miyazaki explains to Edge that Godfrey became tarnished and was exiled from the lands between. It is not 100% clear, but given that we know the tarnished were exiled from the lands between, it seems likely and fits thematically, as we will soon see that Godfrey also lost grace, becoming tarnished, and was exiled ultimately by his wife, the Eternal Queen Marika. Not only is that some juicy family tension, but an unexpected turn that ultimately fits into Miyazaki's vision as Godfrey being heroic and relating to the player character. Miyazaki says he himself became tarnished, and he shares this deep connection with the tarnished, the player character. Godfrey is an embodiment of their long history and struggle. He represents a lot of what the player character stands for, and he symbolizes a deep connection with the player. Something that used to shine brilliantly and now has become tarnished and fallen from grace. Miyazaki says that Godfrey is a major player in the story, and we know he has a voice actor, so I expect we will see Godfrey and hear him talk in some form over the course of the game. Being a From Software character, probably as some horrendous monster, but maybe not. Miyazaki says that Godfrey represents a lot of the game, and a major part is about the brilliance of life and how it withers and eventually dies, as we will soon learn more about. On the topic of the Elden Ring logo, Miyazaki said that it is a representation of the law of the world, the rules, and the order. This golden order is something that the Elden Ring may have once represented, but not directly. It is more about how you apply those rules and how you enforce them in a physical world and what effect they have on it. So it's more the influence of these demigods and how they applied these concepts of order and discipline. That's what's being represented by the Elden Ring and these overlapping and intersecting rings. It gets a little more complicated than that, but I'll leave it there for now. So the logo unsurprisingly represents the Golden Order. The Golden Order is something we've heard about. We know that it was broken after the Shattering, and there were references to the Golden Order in the network test that implied it was some sort of philosophy made law, and this interview supports that. The Golden Order is the way in which the demigods imposed order on the world, their vision of how things should work. And representing that is the Erdtree, which Miyazaki explains more about. What can represent these rules and order but also not be absolute? The tree really fits that bill nicely because it is something that's alive, it's something that grew, and it's something that will eventually wither and die. As we've seen with Dark Souls and other works of From Software, they are interested in the natural and inevitable flow of the universe. And in Dark Souls, the Age of Fire was meant to give way to the Age of Dark, but Gwyn feared the end of his rule and legacy and attempted to perpetuate it, thus forming the basis for the Dark Souls games. So I would not be surprised if some of the demigods feared the withering and death of the Golden Order and the Erdtree that represents it. And maybe some of them have other ideas for how the order of the world should work. This premise seems ripe with possibility and sets up a world in which no one can agree how to bring order to the world, or even if they should. And this is what I was talking about with Godfrey when I mentioned that as a representation of the themes of the game, perhaps he embraced the natural flow of the universe and welcomed change, and maybe that caused problems for a certain Eternal Queen. I'm just speculating, but I'm watching you, America. Speaking of speculation, there was a theory about the player character being a direct descendant of Godfrey. That could maybe be the case, but I think that is firmly speculative at this point, and I am personally not on board with it given what we currently know. And to round out the details of the interview, I want to discuss some interesting development tidbits and why it sounds like Elden Ring is really letting From Software let loose. Miyazaki said that Elden Ring is based on a culmination of everything we've done with the Dark Souls series and with our games thus far. So it's not necessarily about what we couldn't do then and what we could do now. It's more about what Elden Ring has allowed us to do thanks to the experience of developing those games. So in that sense, it couldn't have come first. Elden Ring, as we've heard, is an evolution of their titles over the last decade, and now they're playing with those ideas at a larger scale. Miyazaki explained that one of the benefits of the increased scale and this new format was that it actually allowed us to convey a lot of these details and elements that we maybe couldn't before on that smaller scale. So that was itself both a challenge and a blessing because it allowed us to do so much more. The size and scope of Elden Ring gives them space and the opportunity to imagine ideas of exploration and discovery because they can operate on a level that supports it. Miyazaki also told Edge that we wanted to create this world that was full of the joy of exploration and the unknown. So we wanted to create lots of enticing things for the budding adventurer, and we wanted to prepare lots of these mysterious situations that players would read about or hear about and want to go looking for and want to go exploring. In the interview, Miyazaki confirmed that you will go to the Eternal City and the Sky Temple, two areas I have spoken about excitedly over the course of my item description countdown series. Places like Anor Londo and characters like Aldrich were spoken about and alluded to long before you reach them, and personally I love that kind of setup. It adds pathos and weight to the person or place and a sense of mythological wonder. Miyazaki says of Elden Ring that if I had an ideal game world, Elden Ring gets pretty close to that. He wants tight combat and exploration, and that's what he's hoping to deliver with Elden Ring. What he is not overly concerned with is graphical fidelity. It is an important aspect of games to be sure, but when asked about Demon's Souls Remake and if that added pressure, he was relatively unfazed. It is not and has never been the number one priority for From, even though he made sure to clarify that the graphical team works very hard. It is more that the resources and time go into other areas, and I personally wouldn't have it any other way. And to end on a hype note, I want to share one last quote from the interview. Talking about the motif and role of trees in Elden Ring, Miyazaki had this to say. And for Elden Ring, the tree is obviously more apparent in that respect. The Erdtree. I don't want to go into too many details for fear of spoilers, but it does get nice and complicated. There's a lot to explore here, I feel, and people who are that way inclined are really going to get something out of the game. Thank you, Miyazaki, I appreciate it. And there we have it, starting off 2022, less than 60 days from Elden Ring with a fresh Miyazaki interview. Incredible. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider giving it a like if you did. And if you are here for the energy and passion I bring to Elden Ring pre-release, wait until you see me when the game comes out. For more story, lore, and design content, subscribe to my channel, The Lore Hunter. Thanks for watching.